There's even a lovely iron bar behind the handhold. To be
How
very clear,
convenient.
the hand is going straight up. I just love that the terrain in this video is so helpful for teaching West Coast. Hello and welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast with pixels where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. We're here to help train your eyes so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive training and experience in both partnered and solo dancing. Cassie has about 22 years and I have about 24. Tonight we are looking at Jakub and Emeline, kind of a fusion dance. It is West Coast, but there's some very much not West Coast. You will all see. We'll put the video in the chat.
Yep. Yes. Link is in the chat. Go ahead and give it a watch, and when you're done, we'll get to the screen share.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think I want to start off by mentioning that Jakub has no shoes on.
Yes.
And
which is a power move because that sounds really painful.
It's funny because I have spent a lot of time, dancing barefoot because I've done so many other dances, but I don't like dancing myself, and I also don't like my partner dancing barefoot or in like socks, because you can tell the difference, especially like it's kind of a weird feeling when your partner's in like socks or barefoot. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
Personal preference, definitely.
Yeah.
But that extended opening where they're dancing together but not actually in contact with each other is one of the fusion elements of this dance. So
yeah,
not swing content, but still wonderful and lovely and really engaging to watch. And what I will say though is what you can take from that as a West Coast swing dancer is the amount of time they took before they started getting into the more technical partnering, because we harp on that a lot here.
We do.
It's the idea that the beginning of a dance, you need to not only get to know each other, but you need to start small enough and low energy enough that you have somewhere to go afterwards. And the timing of how they transition from completely open, not touching each other, to actually being in close position in sync with the music is a lovely example of how to do that, but just from a fusion lens instead of a West Coast swing lens.
Right. I think for spotlights, if you're competing in West Coast swing, I think that starting without being in contact with each other is appropriate. But that's also just like, if you want to do that, you can, but obviously you don't have to.
Yeah. And if you were to start not touching each other, you wouldn't be able to spend as much time not touching each other, because judges will ding you if you're not actually partnering by touching each other for too long.
Yep. This beginning part is really nice because they're taking so much time to pay attention to their partner and kind of move off what the other is doing. And they're kind of giving each other, they're like taking turns doing things.
Yep.
So it's not just Emeline, it's not just Jakub.
And instead of trying to influence the other, they're observing each other from a perspective of curiosity. Like, ooh, what are you doing? And being really interested and engaged in your partner instead of overly focused on what you yourself are
doing. Yeah, like you can see in this beginning here, when Emeline kind of comes around to face Jakub, he doesn't immediately bring his arm up into like a closed position of any sort. He kind of lets it hang out, just touching her side kind of, before he brings it in, because he's kind of waiting to see if she's done, if she's doing more. And then he's kind of, he can adjust while he's coming in slow if he needs to.
And then also, like, it's the simple act of getting into close position is musical movement. It's so lovely. And then I also want to highlight that this is not standard closed position. This is the
Right.
opposite side of the body, in case anyone was breaking and not sure why.
Yeah.
That is his left hand on the right side of her back.
I was also going to mention that she has her hand, because of the position that they're in, she has it kind of touching his side as well, because she wraps around really closely to him. So naturally, there's all of that extra space for her arm. So when she comes around, she has it more on the back. And then when she moves away, it slides a little bit.
Yeah. Technical note now getting into some West Coast swing technique. I want to highlight the lovely resisted release and stretch into this connected position right here.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a really lovely stretch across Jakub's chest all the way to his hand on her back. And it's like a rotational spring that's been loaded up that he can then use to pull himself around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he could also have used that to make her go somewhere as well, because you can see with Emeline, she has that right side of her body slightly ahead of the left side, so she's prepped and ready to do something as well.
Mm-hmm. And then now after Jakub crosses to the other side, he's creating a similar connection style across his right side to his right hand. Except instead of it being mostly in his chest, it's mostly in his wrist and forearm, because he is rotated towards his right arm a little bit. He's not completely facing us.
Mm-hmm. And one thing about that, like, rotational switch that they just did, Emeline brings her hand on his back as he moves past her, so that she keeps more contact with him, in order to have more information.
Mm-hmm.
So she starts out with just that one, and it's in a spot where she isn't going to get much information when he's moving in that direction. So she then places the other hand as well, and lets that right hand drape down the arm as he moves away from her, to keep that extra point of contact.
Yep. And then I love how she's also dancing through this moment instead of just kind of being paused, waiting to see what he's going to do.
Mm-hmm. Something that Emeline is really good at is having those moments where she's paused, but she's still kind of doing something. Like, there's still some visual interest. Sometimes there's still a little bit of movement, but she isn't going anywhere. Like, momentum wise, she's not moving. She stays with the weight in the same places on her feet. So if she's split weight, she stays split weight. If she has her foot, or if she has a weight on the right foot, she stays there. On left foot, she stays there. But she's still adding a little bit in.
And I also want to highlight the way she styles her head movement through this turn. So her arm goes past her face, and she kind of tips her head, the right side of her head, to her shoulder a little bit, and then ever so slightly back. So it's a very small degrees. It simply looks bigger than it is, because she's also rotating and traveling, and her arm has changed positions relative to her face.
Yeah, the way that I like to think about that is having the head drag behind the rest of the body, because you can clearly see her shoulders are going somewhere first, and she kind of leaves the head in that same position as the body moves away.
And then I love how they're not rushing into another pattern. They're really taking their time, because this is their first moment out into closed position or open position in this dance.
Yeah, and it's kind of a moment where they're looking at each other and thinking, am I doing something, or are you doing something?
And again, Emeline is doing like an active hold. She's doing more than simply waiting.
Yeah,
And
because she
Jakub is,
starts out over-rotated.
yeah. And Jakub is also having an active hold, but it's less stylized than what Emeline's doing.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting body roll that Jakub does there.
Mm-hmm.
Because it starts out like kind of in the pelvis.
Yeah, the way he
basically
preps
what
for
he
it,
does.
the way he preps for it is really awkward, but it's an important prep for it to
It
like
is.
go somewhere. But that's one of those moments as a dancer you just like pray the cameraman is not pressing the shutter button at that exact moment in time. That's
I
just
have
unfortunate.
so many pictures that are awkward like that.
Right?
That's my forte, taking awkward pictures. So to go back to Jakub, he kind of does a, like, he kind of brings the hips around a little bit to free them up, because you can see he's starting like pretty upright over his feet and over his hips. So he kind of moves the hips around in order to free them up and free up the legs, so he's able to bend the knees and have that momentum go upward. But it looks really nice on him the way that he does it.
Mm-hmm. I wish more people would learn the technique to come into compression and a push break and be able to stay there.
Yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
not easy. It may be simple, but it's not necessarily easy. But it's like a really important skill to have, not just to be able to do more and to style more, but to communicate effectively, regardless of what role you're in.
Yeah, I think especially it's important for follows, because what happens a lot of times is follows will go in for that sugar push and they lead themselves back out of it, rather than having their leads move them, send them, and then they finish it. Right. So rather than hanging out there and letting the lead move, a lot of times follows just kind of like back it right up.
And sometimes that's an appropriate choice to make. The key is to just not make that your automatic basic.
Yes.
What you do
exactly.
out of habit. Because that's where it gets really tricky if it's your habit.
Yeah, so I think the important thing to think of with that is when you come in for that sugar push, when you take that 1, 2, 3, and 4, so 3 and 4, what follows will do a lot of times is go 3 and then send themselves back on that 4, but you want to hang out more forward and let your lead move that foot to place it. And the shaping that they're both adding in there is not affecting their connection.
Right. And I wanted to add, like, based on Emeline's left arm right here, because it's so angled downward, it's not feasible for a follow to provide compression in this direction when their frame is in this position. The compression is going downward. So Jakub is countering it upward, and you can see how as this compression grows and resolves, the hand hold actually does a scoop like this.
Yep.
And then it only goes back down again because they're both kind of pitching towards each other.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the path of the connected handhold through this movement, because it's really important. So first of all, they're doing a variation on like an underarm turn that's on a right side pass instead of a left side pass. But the path of the handhold, it first goes down line to initiate Emeline's momentum to travel. And then it goes up.
Yeah.
It curves up, so it's still progressing. But as soon as she has gotten a little bit closer to her hand, the handhold goes straight up. And then it does not go that way. No. No, no, no. it may look like it's going that way. It's maybe going that way like half a handhold, but it's countering Emeline and then going down and then towards her. If it were to really go that way, it would put a lot of strain on her shoulder because her body would be going that way and her hand would be going that way while she's rotating. And ow, that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, that's one of those things that when a follow is in an extended position with the arm, it creates a really dangerous position for the shoulder. Where if your lead does anything somewhat forcefully, it's probably going to hurt something. So
yeah. And I think the reason why it looks like it's going screen right is because of that rotation. The handhold is moving from closer to us to further away from us.
Yeah.
And because of where we are in the camera in relationship to them, it makes it look like it's traveling back down line more than it actually is.
Yeah, the camera's moving a little bit. Jakub is moving a little bit. Just kind of looks like something that's not happening.
Yeah. But that's the kind of thing that like you need to be able to pay attention to those kind of details, because based on where you are, like in a workshop room, for example, literally where you are in the room relative to your teachers as they're demonstrating something will affect how something looks. It will affect how the spacing looks, and you need to be able to critically analyze what you're seeing and like, is that movement what's actually happening, or is that an illusion because I can't quite see the third dimensional plane, as it were. You need to think critically and not go so far as to fly into the fifth dimension, which is a different episode.
It's a whole other thing.
A whole other thing.
Yeah, but definitely, like you were saying, for workshops, I think the best thing is to, depending on where you're at in the room, just kind of try and figure out where they're at, where the instructor is at in their body positioning. And then when you rotate through to a different spot of the room, watch again. This is a really pretty moment for Emeline. I want to mention that as she comes around here, Jakub is grabbing her like lower arm, like he's not necessarily hand to hand, it's like wrist to wrist. So she's coming around, she's getting more of a point of connection rather than him supporting this movement, if that makes sense.
It's like a point of balance and stabilization instead of weight assistance.
Yeah, because you can see her weight is up over that standing foot. She's ever so slightly angled forward and towards Jakub with the upper body when she kind of rotates in. But as she rotates out, you can see she's pretty upright over her foot. So that is what tells you that she's holding the majority of her own weight. Like, this isn't necessarily a weight supported move.
Yeah. I would say the max amount of like compression through that wrist to wrist handhold happens when she finishes rotating to her right into her arm. Because you can see that Jakub's muscles are definitely engaged to offer counterbalance if she needs it. And she's definitely engaging this arm, but it's like safety wheels instead of 100% necessary to make it functional.
And you can see that connection that they have with the wrists doesn't necessarily change into or it doesn't change from that compression to a stretch until she's like a few steps out of that movement.
And they also,
so they kind of stay there.
Yeah, and they leave that wrist to wrist connection for like a really long time, even once they leave this positioning. And I appreciate that they're not rushing to get back to a quote unquote standard handhold.
Right. Well,
Jakub is just using what he already has to create something more.
Yeah. They also have a very comfortable placement of the hands for both of them. That's something that allows them to comfortably stay in this position where they have wrist to wrist.
Yeah, it's very ergonomic. Neither of them are rotated to an uncomfortable degree. It's very natural positioning.
Yeah.
And then for this sugar bush, I just want to highlight how Jakub's left hand is on Emeline's shoulder. And he lifts up his fingers right there, and he's placing the heel of his hand on the front of her right shoulder. So it's just an additional stabilization point to use if they need it, or for her to use if she wants to play off of it, which she kind of does. She rotates in from it.
Yeah. And I think he partly adds that in because of the handhold that they're in.
Yeah. Because again, this is the kind of thing where they can't have compression this way because they slide out of each other's grip. Right. So there's an angle to the compression.
What he does makes it look like he's going to do something like far more dramatic than he ends up doing.
I like it. He like shortchanges her scrolling and is like, stop. We should hang out here a second.
Yeah.
And then they just take a moment to breathe together and shape together, and then basically reinitiate the back half of a push break. So they did the second half of a push break twice in a row.
Yeah. Jakub adds in those nice like level changes that we talk about.
Yeah, and just pauses in the patterning. So instead of feeling like you have to go from count 1 all the way through to count 6 of a pattern, he, just as much as he will stylize a normal pattern in the normal amount of time it's supposed to take, but he will take pauses and add stuff in the middle and then go back to the standard pattern.
It's a really interesting position that they get into.
I just love how organically he uses the existing connection to create the next thing. So like his left hand is still, it had been on her shoulder, but now that she scrolled away, it has moved down to her elbow. And instead of letting go, he maintains that connection and sees what comes of it. So he does a face loop with the one hand and wraps around her with the other. And it creates this really lovely, intimate shadow position that is so much more engaging and dynamic than if he had let go of that hand.
Right.
And caught her some other way.
Yeah. At the same time, though, he has like a hold on her with that, but it's so that he can adjust it. Like he can move it whenever he so chooses. If they start to get in a position that might be like dangerous for her shoulder or something like that.
Don't try this at home if you have short arms. That's all I will say about that. Having very long arms is very helpful for a lot of things that Jakub does.
Yeah. They're both very army,
limby.
Long limbs.
I can relate to that. I love the shape that Jakub goes in to just counterbalance this moment. And you can really see how expertly they're using the center counterpoint of the handhold, even though it's like fingertip to fingertip.
I know.
That's the kind of thing, like they have the experience and are comfortable enough with each other to like use that fingertip to fingertip. Because some people just really don't like that kind of connection, and that's fine.
And they also, both of them have solid like control of their own bodies, so they can have that like really minimal point of connection.
Yeah, it's counterbalanced, but not a lot of weight to it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's more like an open line of communication. Because you can see right here that like if they were to let go, Jakub might stumble a tiny bit, but he wouldn't fall on his face because he's pretty well balanced on his standing foot right here. And here's another instance of the handhold going straight up. There's even a lovely iron bar behind the handhold. To be very clear, the hand is going straight up. I just love that the terrain in this video is so helpful for teaching West Coast. And see right here is really clear how the handhold is not traveling back where she came from as she's going under it. It isn't until she starts rotating and extending her arm that it does a bit of a scoop to screen right.
This in particular is a part where they're both really paying attention to each other, coming out of that counterbalance.
And I really appreciate how Jakub is really holding this kind of unconventional shape because she just did a back bend and a side bend through that. And so he is not thinking of changing her frame at all. He's like, I need to adjust to her frame completely.
Yeah.
So he is the one that's changing so that way hers can be as stable as possible. And then he takes advantage of the interesting shape that they end up in. Like that's part of his genius.
Yeah, I would say that really being able to have a nice flow in your West Coast swing is about using the shapes and connections that you end up in rather than trying to get out of them and go back to something that you know.
Yeah. I love how we just spent 2 weeks of me being like, it's not the neck. Jakub.
This is the neck, but like
Jakub. It's very gentle.
Yes. And she's not dipping at all.
And they're like professional partners. They are very close. Like there is consent here. So don't assume consent with a partner that's like anyways. Be nice to people's necks. See, she trusts him so much that she's able to lilt and let her head lag behind into the next movement.
Yeah.
And that is trust. Like she knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that her neck is literally safe in his hand.
Yeah.
So it's a really important detail.
It is. And they're also not in like a dip of any sort. So that also probably adds to her feeling comfortable with it.
But then I will add that when they come into this very modified sugar push and she rotates, you can see his hand rotates down. So if he needs to apply any compression, the base of his hand is now on the upper part of her spine, not her neck, and his fingers are just draping over her shoulder.
Yeah.
So he's not pushing on her neck at all.
Right, because he is here kind of pushing her ever so slightly to walk forward. And or it's kind of more so that his hand is staying connected there, like then he's moving her. She's more moving on her own.
Yeah, he uses compression to like initiate her movement, and then they just maintain connection as opposed to him pushing this whole way. Because why not, right? I would also add that he's pulling onto her like cardigan, and that isn't secured across the front of her neck, so it's not choking her. She's getting caught around her shoulders, not like a choker.
I would just suggest not using clothes to lead things.
Just
a general rule.
In general.
Because it has to be something that's like a very aggressive movement in order to lead anything with it. So just like him like leading that, it's more of a visual thing. she can feel the cardigan lifting up off her back. So she knows that he's grabbing it, but he's not like yanking it to redirect her.
Yep. And then here we get another lovely breakaway section that's kind of harkening back to how the dance began. And once again, they're in no rush to reconnect physically. They're just staying connected to each other visually until the handhold just kind of appears out of her styling. They weren't rushing or being anxious about finding that again.
I love that you can really easily see his eyes following her hand, just so that he can choose a correct moment to reconnect with her.
Yeah.
Rather than like grabbing onto her arm when she was in mid-arm styling.
Right.
Don't do that. It's such a nice transition, that slide out away from each other into a normal type of handhold.
And there we had another like pause during the back half of the push break.
Yeah, you can really see how Jakub is keeping his arm that's connected to Emeline like really close to the side of his body in order to have that like break.
Oh, this is my favorite part. Is it time? Posting with posts. Here we go. So
when you have props.
I'm so excited because like the way they interact and compress towards or pull away from the literal post in the middle of the room is how you want to be interacting with the either the handhold or wherever the center counterpoint is in your connection. So if it's an open handhold, it's the handhold. If it's closed position, it's the leader's elbow, that kind of stuff. But the way they're interacting with this is swing content, even though there's a third inanimate partner. Because like what they just did right there, they like technically they could have done that with this handhold as the center counterpoint.
I really like how much he's intentionally keeping in contact with her as he's moving around to the other side of the pole. This is a great face.
So good. And then this next section right here is like so meta because there's like there's two posts squared because like Jakub is going to use the post to counterbalance himself into a fun shape while he's also leading a correct post for Emeline to connect with. And it's just so not also like the line is just divine.
I know,
like
such nice lines.
So nice.
And his flexed foot is an intentional flexed foot, not just there. Which is important if you're going to do anything with a flexed foot. It needs to be intentional. Otherwise, it just looks like it's kind of flopping around.
Yeah. And this shape that he's making, using the pole to counterbalance himself, this could be a handhold with another person on the other end for him to create this shape. Like that's what a center counterpoint is supposed to do. It doesn't move. The pole does not move. Pole does not move. And that's how you're able to create counterbalance on either side of it. This is just so fun. Once again, he's not like rushing to go anywhere. He's like, what can I do with what we've got now? And I like it. It's so cool because there's often that like the illusion of kicking out Apollo's foot from underneath her, right?
Yeah.
which can often get misconstrued as actually kicking Apollo's foot from out underneath her, which is problematic.
Yeah.
This is just like a really gentle way of leading Emeline's leg to do something unique. I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
I think I was going to say that it also creates a nice shape when he has that full wrap with the both legs.
Yeah.
Because nothing else is moving. So the legs are going to be where everyone's attention goes. So he's taking full advantage of that and making sure that it's a nice line of some sort, you know, there's a shape that's created.
Yeah. And I would bet that he's just initiating the movement, being like, hey, you should kick your leg. But then he's kind of relaxing and staying connected and letting her take over the shape.
Yeah.
Because if you were to apply too much pressure for too long, you could hyperextend the person's knee. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Like this position he gets in, like if this were a self-defense situation, he could really bust her knee if he wanted to. So just with great power comes great responsibility. Y'all know the drill.
Don't hurt your partners.
Don't hurt your partners. And once again, the post is the post.
I love how long they use this post as like an addition to their dance.
Because like if they had only spent, I don't know, 8 counts there, it would have felt like a gimmick, you know? But spending more time there is so much more intentional.
Yeah, it becomes incorporated with the dance.
Yeah.
Rather than being a distraction.
Yeah.
Can you go back a little bit to him swinging around?
Yeah. His singing in the rain moment.
Yeah. So the shape and position and everything that he ends up as he's swinging around is a very similar feel to correct like
tethering,
following. Yeah. So you can see that he really like drops into the knees and lets everything kind of ground. And he has that pose to counter that weight that's going diagonally down past him.
Yep. And once he is behind Emeline, he's trying to get away from the post down line first. And then he hits like maximum tension in his arm, and that's when the tether happens. So he's gotten as far away as he can, and therefore the only option with the momentum is to then rotate around the post.
I also want to mention that with his shoulder, it's nice and relaxed back, and he doesn't have his arm like fully extended at all. He still has a bend in the arm to make the muscles active.
Yep. And that would be true even if his hand was further down on the post.
Yeah.
Oh, in this moment right here, where he's really depending on the post to create like a resisted release across his right arm and into his shoulder and to pitch away from the post, that feeling, as a follow, when you're in closed position, you need to function as that counterbalance post for the leader so they can more or less hang off of you in this same way.
Yeah.
A follow who just like they're in my hand, but there's no weight there.
Right.
Not helpful.
Like ironically, the way to make West Coast swing easier is to like use your partner and like put weight into the partner, and so long as it's being balanced on the other end.
Yep.
I love that she added that little push as if she moved him. even though I think he was kind of already moving and she knew he was already moving. Just kind of added it in. So if anyone can't tell, Emeline is totally in control. Jakub is following her.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about that before. Switch roles.
Yes.
Because you can even see that Jakub, with that free hand that he has, his left hand, he like goes to reach and do something, and then he realizes that she's doing something. So then he lets it drop back down, and he just kind of follows her because she's moving. She's slightly ahead of him.
Yeah. And then once he has like a general idea of what she's doing, he re-engages that arm to style it.
Yeah. Yeah, she comes as she's walking forward, and then she kind of comes into an anchored position to say, okay, I'm ready. You can do whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is an important piece for follows. If you want to style something or, do something that your lead isn't leading, make sure that there's an end point to that and that you're clear that there's an end point to that. So get into an anchored position when you're done.
Then I want to add, just because Jakub sees that she's doing something independently doesn't mean he suddenly releases this tension and goes, here, have some more rope.
All over.
One of the bane of my existence. He maintains that connection because she's like, if suddenly one of the constant variables that she had access to suddenly changes, it would throw off her groove.
Yeah.
I'm totally gonna find an Emperor's New Groove gift to insert. It's the only logical choice.
I love that we go back to a really well-known West Coast swing type pattern in the illusion turns.
Yep.
Because we just went from like the whole using the pole, and then they were traveling and moving forward, and she anchored, and then they're bringing it back to something more basic. It's really the way to keep a good balance in your dance if you're kind of experimenting with things, is to let things happen as they may, and then when it's time, when you have a break in things, go back to something more known, go back to something simple.
Telemark was so nice. Okay. We did a whole episode on telemarks, so I'll probably link that above for the replay. But you can really see, so Emeline has planted her right foot on the rail of the slot, and she is continuing her rotation so far that when she plants, this foot is actually like even further away from the slot. And the misconception is that it's the leader's right side driving through that is causing the follow's rotation in that moment, but it's not. The leader is riding the follow's rotation.
Yes.
Like basically there is pressure in her back, from her back into his forearm, that is literally pulling him around and through. It's so fun when you get the hang of it. I love them.
I want to talk about the ending where they go into that little mini lift. So the important part about it, it's really, really, it looks really, really smooth. And it's because it is. So Jakub's kind of catching on to that energy of her dropping. So because her feet were so far away from her, she's almost like falling as he's moving her again. So he kind of catches onto that. He lets it drop, and then he catches that momentum and sends her up. So it's very, very smooth and continuous.
Yeah, and this is one of those, like, I think we watched a Boogie Spotlight with Sarah Van Drake, and was it Jordan? And just because her arm was up and around his shoulders and neck, if he stood up,
he picked
her up.
Yeah.
This is one of those things, like they're so close in this hugging position, and simply because he is taller than her, all he has to do is straighten his legs to pick her up because of where he's holding her.
Yeah, so you can really see that like shape of the drop and rise.
Mm-hmm. It's very much a whoop.
Yep. It's a nice arc.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to kind of go over this particular, it's kind of a lift. She has feet off the ground. I don't know that I would totally call it a lift, but he does have technically her whole weight because both feet are off the floor. However, she isn't going to be very heavy in this particular like placement that she's in when she has both feet off the floor. Yeah. So what happens, you can see that he has a hold of kind of her like abdomen, like lower rib area, and he's hugging that to his upper body. So he's creating that, he makes their upper bodies kind of one. So as he's moving, her feet are staying in the same place, but her upper body is moving. So now all she has to do, because he is already holding her to him, he has the upper body weight already, is release the feet and let them fall underneath her. So it has more to do with that rotational energy because of the way that he's moving her upper body than like a lift. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention for Emeline was that hand that you can see that she has, her free hand that's like on his thigh. There's two like purposes for that. One is to help slow her momentum that's kind of going all the way to the left, right? So she's able to kind of get a little bit of resistance there so she can help stop herself, especially that lower body that's free, that's swinging free. But then also it's just a nice placement so that her hand isn't like awkwardly dangling there because like she doesn't really need it in terms of like weight supported at all. Like it's more so aesthetically and kind of to help stop her rotation a little bit.
Yeah, because when she's coming around here,
yeah, her hand is just kind of there.
Because he's behind her, she is just seeking more information.
Yeah.
So she knows what's going on.
We next week are talking about Austin Quace and Chelsea Palmer from Swingtacular.
Swingtacular 2019.
Yeah.
Before times.
The before time. You're not wrong.
And a little bird tells us that he may or may not appear live and troll us, not as any sort of official guest host, but just as a adorable troll.
We can talk about him in front of his face.
Yeah, and ask him to blink once for yes, twice for no. But then that will be our last episode of 2021, and then we're going to take a break for the holidays, and we'll be back sometime in January. So,
yep.
Yeah, the time does fly.
It does. All right.
Thank you all so much for joining us.
Have a good night.
So I still do the doodly-doo, but the process is now more complicated. I have a new computer. Work in progress. It's a miracle, people. I can actually participate instead of being in a vacuum, just knowing you're all there and not being able to see anyone.
Just hearing my voice.
Yeah. We'll see if this helps or hinders my anxiety levels. Wow, both of my shoulders snap at once with that hand motion. Like
impressive
sound subluxation. Excellent.
I like dislocated my finger earlier when I was doing something. I was like,
excellent. That reminds me, for the after show, we're chatting. Remind me to tell you what happened with the knee doctor.
Oh.
Anyways,
that sounds like a story.